Ever wish there was an easier, more affordable way to get your MBA loans? Well, now there is. CommonBond is a leading student lender, saving members up to $13,000 on MBA loans. Learn more at commonbond.co/touchmba. CommonBond Lending LLC, NMLS number 1175900.
Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, Touch MBA family? Welcome to the show. Great to have you here as always. It's been a while since I've recorded a solo episode. We've had a lot of great interviews in the last 15 episodes, but I wanted to do kind of an instructional tutorial-like episode, keep it short and quick, about getting in with LinkedIn. I want to give you guys 7 tips that you can use to really polish up and optimize your LinkedIn profile. But before I get into that, just a couple quick announcements. As always, I hope all of you know by now that you can get free school selection help at touchmba.com. Go check that out. Also, we've been working really hard on our Ambassadors Forum, which is basically having student representatives from the top 30 business schools from around the world share their experience, post pictures. We just had Needling from South Africa, who will be attending Columbia. He put some pictures of the Columbia MBA World Tour that's going on right now before students even start the program. It's crazy. They have like these guest hosts all over the world. So before you even start the program, you can travel to like 5-10 countries, if you have the time and money, of course. And another one of our ambassadors from Ohio State Fisher, Han, from Vietnam, she just opened an art gallery as part of her summer internship between her first and second years. Luckily, I'm in Ho Chi Minh as well. So she invited me and I took a couple pictures, but it's just really cool to get, an on the ground feel for what's really going on. And we really expect to have a lot of great conversations there. So go check that out at ambassadors.touchmba.com. So let's cover 7 LinkedIn tips. Let's make that sound better. Top 7 LinkedIn tips for MBA applicants. For those of you who don't know, LinkedIn is basically a huge professional social network. And I think over the past 10 years, I've seen the use of LinkedIn evolve in terms of MBA admissions, in terms of what schools are using it for. I think it's gone from being a reference check. So we would get your application. And then maybe if we had questions on your application, we'd try to find you online. And, usually that would be your LinkedIn profile, right? And see how that stacked up with your application. But it's moved from being a reference check to more of a first impression. I think a lot more schools are looking at your LinkedIn profile. For example, I heard that Columbia Business School has actually recruited MBA candidates on the LinkedIn platform. And I know schools like UT Austin is allowing applicants to use LinkedIn recommendations instead of having to submit recommendations. And, a number of other schools are experimenting with incorporating, your LinkedIn profile in the application. So it's becoming less of a reference check and more of a first impression. You guys all know, I'm sure you've met someone in a professional setting or a social setting and you've exchanged your, social network IDs, whether that's Facebook or LinkedIn. Oh man, is that really like a chainsaw in the background? Okay. Well, this is Vietnam. That's what happens. The country is building itself. So hopefully you guys can hear this. But you ever, meet someone and you're super excited about them and then they give you their Facebook and then you go to their Facebook page and you're super let down because maybe you thought this person was interesting or, fun. And then when you go to their Facebook page, all you see is like 52 million selfies taken from the same angle, or just posting, 15 times a day, like links that you don't really care about. It can really ruin your impression of the person. That counts for a lot. That virtual first impression counts for a lot, is the point I want to get across. So this matters in MBA admissions. Before, for example, I have guests on the podcast, of course, I'll research their LinkedIn profile, right? It's a quick way to get a better idea of their professional background and see what they've been involved in. And I'm sure they do the same to me. So regardless of whether you're applying for an MBA or your next job, I think it's important to get your LinkedIn profile in order. And one of our listeners wrote me this. He said, "I'm curious about my social media presence and profile. How should I be thinking about these now that I'm beginning to, connect with alumni in schools for MBA applications? Do you expect schools to look at your social media profile?" Yes, I've already answered that question. Do you have any guidelines for how to arrange your content and sharing? Great questions. And I want to record this episode almost like a tutorial. So those of you who are driving or on the subway or something, won't be able to do this right away. But, ideally, you can just play this episode, have your LinkedIn profile open, and let's just go through it step by step. So there's 3 big principles that you have to keep in the back of your mind. 3 key things you need to do with your LinkedIn profile. The first is you want to make a good first impression. And that's for all people, whether that's other employers, your colleagues, other potential business partners, or MBA programs. Number 2, you want to reinforce your story. You want to reinforce the story you've presented in your MBA application. And 3, you want to add to that story, online in ways you can't in a paper application. Well, not a paper application anymore, but in a relatively more 2-dimensional MBA application, right? With LinkedIn, you can showcase a lot more of yourself and round out your profile. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Make a good first impression. Let's start with the easiest part and perhaps the most fun part of this whole exercise, which is upload a professional profile picture. All right. Don't look scary. Don't look like you just got out of jail, obviously, but look pleasant at the very least. It's fine. You don't have to necessarily be in a suit and tie. You don't have to have a super formal LinkedIn profile picture. Of course, it really depends on your industry too, but definitely look pleasant and approachable and professional. Okay, number 2, at a minimum, you want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile matches your CV. That the profile that admissions officers are seeing in your MBA application and your LinkedIn profile match. If they don't, that's going to raise huge red flags. So I'm talking about, of course, your school, when you graduated, what your major was, your work experience, which companies you worked for in what years. If there's any fibbing there, that's a really bad sign. So in terms of making a good first impression, the first 2 tips have all been about covering your downside, right? Make sure you have a pleasant picture and make sure that your LinkedIn profile at the very least matches your CV. Number 3, you can control who sees what activities on your public profile, what sections of your LinkedIn and what activity of your LinkedIn. So I was stunned to see, for example, that on my public LinkedIn profile, you could actually see my activity. Like if I liked someone's post, if I liked a presentation or liked a comment that somebody said on LinkedIn, I didn't realize that was public. And if you log into LinkedIn and you go to the top right, there's actually a link that says edit your public profile. And if you click on that, you can actually decide, which sections show. So whether that's your headline, your websites, your summary, your experience, your activity, your education, your skills, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you go through that and double check what your profile looks like when you're logged into LinkedIn and when you're not, because that's how schools will find you. They're most likely going to see your public profile. So make sure that you're showing activity and parts of your profile that you want them to see. So those are my 3 tips for making a good first impression. That's covering your downside, making sure, you don't raise any alarm bells for admissions officers. Let's go to tip number 4, which is now under reinforcing your story. Not only do you want your information on your LinkedIn profile to match your CV, but you want the story that your LinkedIn profile tells to match the narrative of your MBA application. Does that make sense? Admissions officers such as myself would look at your LinkedIn profile and craft a story in their heads if you haven't done that for me. So I'm going to, quickly in about 30 seconds, glance through your LinkedIn profile, see how you're presenting yourself, what your picture's like, what your headline is, what your summary is, what your work experience is, what your education is. Then I'm going to see kind of what skills people seem to rank you highly for, what your interests are, who you're following, all these things. So there's actually a lot of pieces to your LinkedIn profile, and you want to make sure that they're telling the same story that you put in your application. I think there's a couple ways you can do this. Definitely make use of the headline and the summary sections of your LinkedIn profile. Headline is basically like anything you want. Mine, I just put founder, educator, and host. There's probably a better headline for me out there, but the key thing is for you to be, aware of that headline. A lot of people are going to see that right after your name. And then you can also update the little blurb, below the headline, where you can give a summary of yourself. And make sure those two things match up with the narrative you're presenting in your MBA application. You don't want, for example, to have your headline say, "Oh, I'm looking for new jobs in the consulting industry," and then in your application, you're writing about applying to be in the finance industry, right? That's not going to match up. So yeah, tell the same story in your LinkedIn profile. Number 5. I think it's important to do an edit as well of your interests. And so interests would be like, who are you following? Like which influencers, companies, groups, or skills are you following? And probably most importantly, which schools are you following? So a lot of you might be following schools. Now, I think this gets a little touchy because let's say I'm the admissions director of Oxford, okay, Said. And I see that most of your interests are following Cambridge Judge or HEC Paris, top European schools, or maybe even like Stanford or Harvard stuff. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you seem to be much more interested in other business schools, that might give me a little bit of a bad feeling, right? Because even if I think you're outstanding, what are the chances that if I admit you, you'll actually come to Oxford, Said? Admissions officers are really concerned about yield. So in terms of reinforcing your story, you want to probably do an audit of the schools you're following. You could still follow those schools, but make them non-public, right, on your profile. Again, matching the narrative to the schools you're applying to. And also, if you're super into startups or entrepreneurship, or you're super into social entrepreneurship, you're super into, say, renewable energy, and I look at your interests and I can really see, you're pretty involved in these sort of things, whether it's following, certain influencers, following certain organizations, the types of skills, courses you're taking. I can kind of in my mind say, this person has actually taken some steps in this area. Like he or she knows this niche really well. So I think those are other ways you can reinforce your story through your interests. Let's go to tip number 6, which is how can you add on to your story? So again, I personally feel that the MBA application right now is still a bit flat, still a bit two-dimensional. I know a lot of schools have incorporated, video essays, PowerPoint presentations, and these sort of things, like trying to get more multimedia into the application. But it's still, in my opinion, quite an archaic application in terms of writing essays and CVs and so forth. Well, what you can do with your LinkedIn profile is make your profile more three-dimensional. Maybe you couldn't squeeze in some information in your online application. Maybe there wasn't enough space, or maybe, it just wasn't the right format. So what I mean, for example, me hosting this podcast, I don't just say I'm host of the Touch MBA podcast. I can actually link to 2 or 3 of, say, my best podcasts on my profile, right? So that's so much more powerful than just saying, oh, I'm the host of the Touch MBA podcast. Big deal, right? But then if you go on my LinkedIn profile and you see, I've interviewed over 60 admissions directors, like I put up an episode where it shows what were the top 10 tips I learned after interviewing 20 admissions directors. It's a lot more impressive than just saying you're the Touch MBA podcast host. So use the linking of your LinkedIn profile to showcase projects that you're proud of and that contribute to your narrative. That could really add to your story, add another dimension. So there's many ways you can do this. For example, if on your LinkedIn profile, you can click on Add New Profile section on the top right corner, and you can put in tons of stuff. Publications, certifications, courses, projects, honors and awards, patents, test scores, languages, organizations you're passionate about, etc. So there's lots of stuff you can add to your profile to round it out. And I think that's super useful. And of course, tip 7 would be adding endorsements. Texas McCombs is already allowing applicants to use their LinkedIn endorsements. I think it's nice to get, if you can, especially from your more recent jobs, positive endorsements. That's as simple as just asking your colleague or your boss to write something there for you. And I don't think you need to have, like 10 endorsements. That's almost overkill. But, if you have a good solid number of endorsements, that's a differentiator because most people don't have any LinkedIn endorsements. And the same goes with your featured skills. So the easiest way there is to honestly go through your LinkedIn connections and, rank people for what you think they're great at, whether that's marketing, strategy, consulting, photography, whatever. And then usually if you do that, people will return the favor. I have like 18 people that ranked me as competent in terms of research and 15 people who rated me competent for business strategy. And while I think I'm okay at those things, I think I'm much better at some of my other featured skills and endorsements. And you might feel that way too. So you might want to be more conscious about trying to get, some more endorsements there, like for the skills you really want the adcoms to know, you're stronger in. So again, it's how you present your profile, taking control of that virtual first impression. And one last note from all these 7 tips. Remember that the 3 big things you want to do with your profile are make a good first impression, reinforce your story, and add to your story. And sometimes the best stories are the simplest stories. Even though I'm telling you guys to go through your profiles and add projects and add, multimedia when you can, be selective so that someone from a top school can look at your profile within 30 seconds to 60 seconds and quickly kind of get your positioning. If you put too much there, that can also distract from your story. Okay, so just be very cognizant of that. And the best way to test your stories is to get your friends and colleagues and strangers to look at them and tell you what they think. Definitely get more eyes on it. That's a good way to catch stuff that you didn't realize you were doing or presenting yourself in ways that you didn't think. Okay, so that's the episode. In terms of getting in with LinkedIn, the 7 tips are: make a good first impression by uploading a very pleasant and professional profile picture. Number 2, at a minimum, make sure your resume and your LinkedIn profile match. Number 3, make sure you edit or are aware of what activities and sections of your LinkedIn profile can be seen in public. And then number 4, in terms of reinforcing your story, make sure that the unspoken, the tone of your LinkedIn profile matches your narrative and purported career interests. Number 5, carefully audit your interests. Which influencers, companies, groups, and business schools you're following. Number 6, secure endorsements from colleagues or employers of your last few jobs. That'll give you an extra edge. And number 7, whenever you can, put up examples of projects that you're proud of that are, have a multimedia nature to them. All right. I also want to thank our sponsor, CommonBond. Save up to $13,000 with a low-interest MBA loan from CommonBond. CommonBond has funded over $1 billion in student loans, and their easy online application only takes minutes. To learn more, visit commonbond.co/touchmba, CommonBond Lending LLC, NMLS number 1175900. So yeah, those of you looking for, the best loans for US MBA programs, definitely check out CommonBond. And also I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, but we're on Instagram. That's right. We're moving on to Instagram. So you can find us at instagram.com/touchmba, or just, search for Touch MBA on Instagram. And I'm pretty excited about this because it's basically our ambassadors just posting videos, pictures of their journey. And it's completely unedited and completely not polished. It's just students sharing, what they're doing and their experiences. And it covers, all the schools our ambassadors are at. So like 30 schools. We only have 2 posts up there. We have 9 followers. That's right, 9 followers. Look out, world. But we hope to turn this into something fun and useful for applicants. So check that out. Just search for us, Touch MBA, on Instagram. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your #1 school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.